We are live from the SDG Media Zone in Davos, Switzerland, and I'm very pleased to be joined by the heads of the two largest UN agencies, Ms. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director of UNICEF, and Mr. David Beasley, Executive Director of the World Food Programme. You are joining forces today to launch a new initiative to accelerate progress for children. The Secretary General has called for a decade of action to make sure we do deliver the Sustainable Development Goals by the 2030 deadline. So we have just 10 years left. Great to see you join forces. Tell us more, why now? Why these two agencies? Please, Ms. Fore.
Well, we've got some big problems out in the world, and one is for children, and it is the children that are suffering from wasting. We have about 50 million children under the age of 5, and they have not enough to eat, and we do not have ways to reach them. But together, if WFP and UNICEF are together, we think we can reach 50% more children, and that we can move to prevention of wasting. What happens when a child does not eat enough is that they do not grow properly. They're underweight, and stunting can come. They will be under height. So this prevention is extremely important. We'd like to move the amount to no more than 3% of children in the world will suffer from wasting. Mm-hmm. And if we could do that, we will have made a big difference in the lives of maybe 20 million, 30 million children.
Well, when you get, the inspiration of working with UNICEF, they're out on the field every day with nutrition in children, and we out all over the world as well, in the most difficult places. And we know there are millions and millions of children that don't get the nutrition at all. They don't get school meals at all. In fact, sometimes the only meal they'll get is out of school. And we know there's 73 million children now that don't have access to school meals on the nutrition, the diet that they need. And so bringing the firepower of the two largest operations together in the UN to say, hey, we're not about silos, we're about children. We're about taking limited resources and maximizing those resources to help children all over the world. And working with Henrietta is always great. She's fun, she's incredible. And so the spirit of these two organizations coming together, because it's all, everybody's talking about the UN's always been in silos, but no, the new UN, the reform is this inspiration, this spirit that we're going to tackle poverty and hunger and malnutrition for children wherever they may be, and our teams are working together. And we'll get into some of those details in the next few minutes. So it's just great to be on stage with Henrietta. She's my leader. She's my inspiring partner.
Well, great to see this partnership.
We are really in partnership.
True. That's the spirit of the decade of action. That's wonderful. Let's maybe talk a little bit more about children under the age of 5 and what exactly is the problem that you're trying to fix.
Well, it's lack of nourishment. And the first 1,000 days of a child's life are extremely important. It's also during school when they get a little bit older. So there are two critical points. But let me just start with the first 1,000 days. How a mother is nourished is very important, and often mothers are malnourished, and then the children, babies are born, and they are malnourished. So if we can move to the prevention side, we can have both healthier mothers and healthier children. We believe that we can reach children and stop the wasting. I mentioned underweight and under height. So a child's brain has to develop with good nutrition, and their body has to develop with good nutrition. And together, as David said, we are out in the field. We're in many countries all around the world, but we're going to start in just a few countries, and we'll work on both segments of a child's life. This very early segment, the first 1,000 days, and then later when they go to school.
So when they go to school, what's the problem there? Health, nutrition?
Well, it's a combination of factors, and it depends on where you are in the world. But if you go look at every developed country on earth, there's school meals. In our home country, the United States, in the 1920s, the United States government and the states came together realizing if our children don't get healthy school meals, we will not build a strong nation. And so we saw firsthand experience. I know the school I went to, we had school meals, and it impacted dynamically the growth economically and otherwise in the United States and every other developed country in the world. So it's a fundamental building block. We know that for every nation, every child, when you don't get the food you need, the nourishment you need, it can impact the GDP up to 16%. So if your GDP of a nation, of a poor nation, is $200 billion, do the math. That's $150 million, $300 million that's lost due to, and how many programs could that support because the intellectual capacity has been diminished for lack of school meals and nutrition and health. And so when we partner together, we come in with the school meals, but we also need good water, sanitation, nutritional supplemental like iron and vaccines. And so together, maximizing our strengths and minimizing inefficiencies out in the field in the most difficult places on earth. And we know it makes a difference. There's 73 million children who get no school meals at all. And these are the countries that are struggling or suffering. So you're going to pay for it. As I tell the wealthy nations, you're going to pay for it one way or the other. Why not do what's good? Why not do what's right? And invest in the children now, because otherwise you're going to have extreme poverty. You're going to have destabilization. You're going to have all types of complications when people don't have a future. And so it's a lot cheaper, and it's the right thing to do.
It is. Let me just build on that, because we're not doing it alone. It isn't just the United Nations that does it. We work with the countries. So the local health ministries, the local education ministries, so that we actually help inform the people so that mothers and fathers can look after themselves and their children's nutrition, all during their childhood. And it's very important. But if governments are able to look after their people, and you put this nutrition counseling into the health plan of the nation, it means they will have healthier people, and all these GDP benefits will accrue to that country. So we're doing it with the countries, for the countries.
And this is extremely important, because when we go into a country, we actually want to have an exit strategy. How do we achieve goals and objectives that are no longer needed? So in school meals, we've now turned over, I think, 35 nations. We've turned over the complete school meals programs. We come in and help them get it started. Same thing with UNICEF. We'll come in and work with the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Children, whatever it may be, helping them understand the dynamics of why this is important, why it must be done this way. These are your children. This is your nation. Take advantage of our expertise. Take advantage of our failures so you don't make the same mistakes that we've learned globally over the many, many decades. And so it's incredible to see when a country takes ownership and really begins to implement this from school to school, neighborhood to neighborhood, across the nation. And then we can start pulling back, and it's a beautiful thing when the government and the nation takes ownership of their own opportunities.
So this is obviously a global problem, but tell us a little more about which countries or regions you're going to start with. Where are you focusing on?
So we'll start in the Sahel, and then we'll also move to the Horn of Africa. So right now it's in Africa, and we did that because we thought that our teams are on the ground, some of the most difficult places. The countries are in need. We have populations there that could really benefit from it, because if we're going to change these Sustainable Development Goals, we're going to have to do some big, massive changes in how we work. And if we can work in a different way, we can reach 20, 30, 40, 50 million children. I mean, it will make a big difference in the lives of the children in those countries, and we'll meet some of these goals. I mean, on the wasting, we're at 7%. We can move to 3%. That will be a big change that will mean that we'll make some of our goals in 2030. So if we can work differently to meet the goals, that's the decade of action. That's the acceleration that we're after.
And we're already in all these countries around the world. But the question is, how do we maximize and do things even more strategically? So we're picking 6 countries, 3 in the Sahel, 3 in Somalia. But let me say this, because it's really important. When you look at where the Earth was, planet Earth, 200 years ago, those 1 billion people, 84 to 85% of the people were in extreme poverty. 95% of the people were in poverty. Imagine that. Today, less than 10%. But in the last 3 years, the hunger rate and poverty rate in many areas is going back up for the first time in a long, long time. Why? Man-made conflict, climate change, destabilization, war, conflict, these types of things. So we built systems that have really reached more children and more people than any time period in world history. But we've got 815 million people we're still not getting to. So they are not feeling the wealth. They're not feeling the prosperity. So we've got to step up our game to reach that 821 million. And out of that 821 million, we were talking about the 50 million, the 33 million in different dynamics of children under 5, etc. And so imagine, because these aren't just numbers. These are little girls and little boys with names. Imagine if it was your little girl or your little boy or your cousin or niece or nephew. This is what we're talking about. So when we're in New York or in Rome headquarters, we're putting together the strategy as a team. But when we get out on the field together, I see what happens. Her heart comes alive. She's bursting with energy to how are we going to help that child right there. And so that's the beauty of the United Nations, is how can we take what we've done so far, been so successful, but how do we tweak it and make it even more effective and more strategic? And that gets us to the decade of action. So here we are.
There's another key that we both have, which is girls. If we can educate the girls, they'll be the mothers, they'll be the ones that will really be focusing on nutrition. Because if we get good nutrition for a child, especially when they're young, and there's good breastfeeding and other things that we know work, it will change their lives. So she's a hidden asset for us, the girls.
It really is. On school meals, in many of these countries that we're in, the girls don't get an education. I mean, the culture's different, and the girls don't have equal opportunity. And we come in with our programs, no, we go do it for all the children. And we can go from country to country to country, because in many of these countries, the girls get married at age 11, 12, 13 years old. They'll have 4, 5, 6 children by the time they're 16, 17, 18. But when we come in with nutritional programs and the school meals programs together, well, the migration rate drops off the chart. Teen pregnancy drops off the chart. Marriage rate drops off the chart. Recruitment by extremist groups drops off the chart. Quantify economically all these matters. It's a lot cheaper. For every dollar we spend in these programs, a return on investment is between $4 and $20. So you see why this GDP factor is very, very important. You invest in children, you invest in the future. You invest in girls, you're investing in the future. And we're investing in girls because now we've got millions of girls that are getting the same opportunities as little boys. And we can see the difference already in the villages, in the most remote, difficult places. And we could share some of the horror stories, but some of the great stories where women are now empowered and making a difference in communities. And so anyway, she's my leader, so she helps charge the way.
So the two of you are leading this together, but you brought in other partners, countries. You need partners on the ground. What would you like to see from the business sector, from the private sector? Since we're here in Davos, what would be your message to CEOs?
Go ahead.
We have lots of things that we need from the private sector. For many of them, they buy the ingredients for the products that we need for nutrition. And these therapeutic foods have a whole supply chain, from farmers who are local business people to the big multinational companies, so that this supply chain can be efficient, it can be fast, we can reach more people if we can do it at less cost and greater volume. We also could use expertise. One of the reasons that a set of parents send their children to school is because they feel they'll get a good education. But if they can also get a good meal, it will make a difference. So companies can help in the schools also, but they can help in ways to teach nutrition and teach skills and education for digital in schools. So it becomes a very complementary outfit that you can have in almost any country, where businesses help governments, help nonprofit organizations, help academic institutions, and we who are the UN.
Well, I mean, Henrietta is exactly right, and there's so much opportunity. It's not just about the business community stepping up financially, and that is an issue in itself. In the world today, There's $360 trillion worth of wealth, fluid wealth primarily. And for any child to go to bed hungry without the right nutrition, that's a disgrace on humanity. So the wealthy people in the world need to step up, number one. But number two, back to what Henrietta was talking about, we are involving the private sector now strategically to help us come up with better products, more nutritional products at a cheaper price, which is extremely important. When you don't have enough money to reach everybody, how can you maximize what you do have? But also, several of the companies that we're meeting with here, we're working with to put manufacturing facilities, processing facilities in Africa. I mean, Burundi, Rwanda, etc. And so now we're trying to buy more locally, empower the smallholder farmers. Homegrown school meals is another good example. We go, instead of bringing the food in from the outside, from Europe or from the United States or Japan, well, now we're trying to grow as much as we can locally, stimulate the local economy, change their nutritional growing and the growing habits, because they might grow only maize. And we're like, no, we need to grow vegetables and this for the schools. And then we'll come in with the schools and do products and programs, super cereals that are now being processed locally, creating jobs, changing habits, changing the country. And the countries are helping, make this happen. Because this is a problem. When the countries themselves, the leaders, don't step up and truly take ownership, it's all the difference in the world. And what Henrietta was saying earlier, we're really trying to help the country take ownership. And when the private sector steps up, working with the government, it's all the difference in the world. You will never solve these problems by philanthropy alone. It must have the government's buy-in and the private sector engagement. And so this is what, we're sort of the catalytic converters to try to inspire and encourage and teach and this kind of thing,
But we could use a little fuel.
We could use the fuel.
If there was anyone who could try to help us, we would really love it, because these are really important points in a child's life and also in family's life.
So how much are we asking for on this?
Well, so 200 million would
200
be nice.
million.
But we could really use help, because if we're going to reach these goals, we could use some fuel in our vehicles. And we really feel strongly that together we can accomplish much more. And if we can do it on prevention, then we will end some of the problems that we are dealing with later on in life. And it can change everything for these countries.
Yeah, an amazing initiative really to protect children from age 0 all the way through school. Thank you so much, Henrietta Fore and David Beasley, and good luck.
Well, thank you, and we're looking forward to reaching these goals together. We can get it done.
Fantastic.